The Cannabis Conversation. A European perspective on the emerging legal cannabis industry.
Welcome to the Cannabis Conversation with Anuj Desai, where we explore the new legal cannabis industry by speaking to the professionals that are helping to shape it. Got a really interesting show coming up this week with a view from the alcohol industry. But first though, I'd like to mention a couple of upcoming conferences. The Cannabis Europa guys are crossing the pond for the first time with conferences in Toronto and New York coming up in November. The goal is to provide valuable ways in which North American businesses can enter the growing European medical cannabis market. Government trade delegations, ministers, MPs, senators, cannabis industry leaders and entrepreneurs will be sharing actionable insights alongside great networking opportunities. Cannabis Europa, the Transatlantic Forum, is in Toronto on November the 5th, and Cannabis Europa, the Leaders Summit, is in New York on November the 7th. These are really high quality events. Cannabis Europa was my first ever cannabis conference back in 2018 and set me on my cannabis journey. I have a 10% discount code for those interested in attending, so please check out my social pages for links. I've also got a giveaway for another conference that I'm speaking at in Malta, so stay tuned after the episode for more details on that. Okay, cool, on with the show. Enjoy.
On today's show, I've got Spiros Malandrakis. That's my best Greek pronunciation there. Spiros is a leading analyst on the alcohol industry for Euromonitor International, but he's recently broadened his scope to look at the emerging cannabis industry over the last couple of years. He's a regular contributor to various magazines, and I've seen him speak at various conferences, so I'm really pleased that I've managed to get him on the show this week. Hello, Spiros. How are you?
The pleasure is all mine.
Good. I'm glad to hear. Cool. Okay, so yeah, look, I think people are really interested to hear about the kind of intersection between the alcohol industry and the emerging consumer cannabis industry. Perhaps you can tell us a bit more to start with about your background and how you got into this and how you started looking at cannabis.
I find myself in this, I've called it in the past, the green intersection of scene, the in between an alcohol industry essentially on the defensive around the world, primarily in Western markets, which essentially has been the basis of my assumptions, my arguments, and my insights that led me down the path of cannabis. And of course, on the other hand, the ascending green wave, which I believe I was one of the first alcohol analysts that had the courage or the conviction, if you wish, to associate the two and understand that the potential downfall or at least decline of the one could provide opportunities for the rise of the other. A couple of years ago, I've been covering the alcohol industry for the last 12 years, primarily focusing on branding, innovation, the latest trends, having a global perspective, and always trying to find essentially, this magical work we analysts have to do, essentially predict the future. That's what is at the core of what we are supposed to be doing.
That's why I got you on the show.
Yes, exactly. That's what we're doing. A bit of magic.
Of course.
On a beautiful Monday night. So a couple of years ago, when I started looking into primarily a specific undercurrent that would also become major within the alcohol and drinks arena, and by that I mean the rise of non-alcoholic adult beverages, I started realizing that the signs were everywhere. And by that, I mean demographics as a starting point, millennial generation consumers, Generation Z consumers, the youngsters, not like us, the people that, go out and enjoy and drink. They were increasingly asking for lower alcohol content products or even going entirely teetotal, which back in the 90s, as you can probably imagine, would have not only sounded far-fetched, but would have sounded almost science fiction.
Yeah.
At the same time, I started realizing that what was happening in Canada was not an anomaly, but more like the starting firing shot of essentially a massive green revolution that would change the landscape of the planet in many ways, not just in terms of intoxication, but across all FMCG industry. I combined the two in my mind, and I remember, look at the alcohol industry in a vacuum, it was still facing significant challenges that I could only foresee growing, not going down.
And so I presume that these challenges were due to kind of increased health priorities from younger people. People were thinking more about their health. Everyone's now a narcissist on Instagram and wants a six-pack, and that doesn't really work with beer drinking.
It is a combination. It is a combination of these factors. One of my realizations for the alcohol industry over all these years is that it's essentially marketing in a bottle. So lifestyle associations are integral to the propositions of the industry anyway. So what do I mean by that? I mean that the vast majority of people consume alcohol that says something about them when they hold it in their hands. Obviously, the intoxication is part and parcel of that, but it always had to do with marketing. It always had to do with self-branding in some way. So I don't want to be too harsh on the young kids in that sense.
I'm being flippant.
I know. I'm worse most of the time, but I'm trying to give them a chance. So I do understand where they're coming from in that sense. But you were right. It's a combination of increasing health awareness, challenging at the very least disposable incomes, and this essentially idea of catering their own eclectic brands in the panopticon of the online world. It's a world that they can never escape. One of the main reasons that we've found over the last few years, not only are they drinking less, but we've seen massive declines in binge drinking. And one of the reasons that youngsters would actually put forward when asked, to the extent that they would open up, would be that the main fear was that these potential photos had the potential to actually haunt them 10, 20 years down the line in their careers. So it is this kind of, they're fearful as well. It's not that they're just, obviously there's a certain degree of narcissism there because this is the way the social media ecosystem works in its nature. But at the same time, I think there's also a degree of fear that if we do something drunk, if we do what me and you used to do,
of which there's very little photographic evidence.
Thank God for that. And that's, who knows, but hopefully not. But we could get away with it. Yeah. And I think this is not going to get less. This is just getting more and more. All of the mechanics and the dynamics that we just described will only accelerate further. So extrapolated that, thought about the situation 10, 20 years down the line, superimpose the idea that I do believe that intoxication, while it has become a bit of a taboo, it should not be something that we are afraid of or, we should ashamed of even. Yeah, exactly. This kind of neo-prohibitionist rhetoric that starts, appearing around us, that it's almost making, having fun or a recreation a problem or something, as you said, to be ashamed of. I think it's an integral part of human nature, and we're not going to get over that. To the extent that we want to repress it, we'll come back and backfire. So, if you combine all these ingredients of the analytical cocktail I described, the final result is alternatives to alcohol, intoxicating, or not, if we're talking about CBD or other cannabinoids, but not necessarily containing ethanol or other, alcohol with everything that this comes with.
So, to summarize it, so alcohol has been suffering for a number of years in a certain trajectory, and this has sort of coincided also with the emergence of a potential legal cannabis industry that may supplant it in some places.
Yes, absolutely.
Great. And lots of those reasons I've heard also for why young people are drinking less than probably our generation or previous one. So it's good to hear that from an analyst as well.
Yes.
Okay, so from an FMCG perspective, to sort of draw parallels to your analysis on alcohol, and FMCG stands for fast moving consumer goods, which I just looked up again today.
Just for our listeners, everything you can find on the supermarket age.
Yeah,
basically. It's very straightforward. Yeah.
And where would you say, from an FMCG perspective, we are with the cannabis industry in Europe and then also in the US? Because they're two different things, I think.
They are entirely different, primarily in my mind because of their different places they are on their respective timelines, rather because of fundamentally different socioeconomic or political circumstances. I tend to disagree with the prevalent belief that tends to be dominating the floorboards and audiences and conference in Europe at the moment, at the very least, that Europe will never become recreational and it will be all about medicinal, and you should just forget it, because I don't know if you've heard about this. Generally speaking, in Europe it tends to be more pronounced. I think it might have to do with the starting, as I said earlier, embryonic steps of any industry, that it makes it much easier to discuss it within a medical context than just saying that cannabis will be everywhere and will become a fast-moving consumer goods. And I understand that. But in the medium to long term, I don't see these two diverging. I essentially see one industry, obviously there will be specializations, specialized products that will be catering for a specific audience.
Yes.
But it was the same kind of, is the question I asked someone from a department in Greece that was responsible for giving the licenses for medical cannabis, and I called him up just to understand, because it's it's so convoluted. And I'm like, I'm calling for cannabis. He said, for medical cannabis. I'm like, yeah, It's the same thing. He says, no, it's not the same thing. It's not this. I said, what do you mean it's not the same thing? I mean, it's the same plant. Like, legally you can call it medical or not, but essentially, and he was just so confused because it was the moment I think that it dawned on him that he might be responsible for selling what he considered to be, illegal substances or drugs. And the taboos are coming back there, to haunt decades-old stereotypes. But in essence, I don't think that Europe will be medical and the US will be recreational. And no, I think that the end results, yes, there will be specialized projects, but all FMCG industries, from confectionery and packaged foods, and confectionery actually, I believe, will play a huge important role even in recreation in terms of edibles. They have historic associations that they will take advantage of, but they're also much better positioned for much more meticulous dosing and control. So from that end, to non-alcoholic drinks, to alcoholic drinks with obvious reservations about combining THC with alcohol, because this is going to be tricky, at least in the beginning, but not in the end, to beauty and personal care, which already has fully embraced cannabis offerings and massively disrupting it already, to apparel, clothing, all the way down to clearly medical products that are tailored for specific ailments. Yeah, that would go to the pharmacies. But I expect essentially cannabis to become one of the biggest disruptors across the board, and not just within alcohol drinks, and definitely not just separated and secluded away from frying ice in the pharmacy.
Yeah. And so to break it down, I mean, essentially at a high level, THC is legal in some areas of North America, so various states in the US and Canada as a whole, whereas in Europe, that's not the case. And it's... Yes. Yeah. So the FMCG industry in relation to cannabis in Europe is largely driven by CBD at the moment.
Yes, which, as we were having a quick chat just before, I think we were in agreement that, CBD, generally speaking, I tend to be wary of too many people on one side of any boat. It tends to capsize. That's what happens. And in this case, the whole cannabis bandwagon and everyone jumping on the CBD side, afraid that they will touch upon the psychoactive properties of THC and face believable challenges. I find that extremely short-sighted. I understand the obvious legislative issues that they're facing and why they're doing it. But I also believe that you mentioned it in the interview I told you I was having with Imbibe, because that's why they called me. They said, remember 2-3 years ago, you said in 3 years' time, everyone will be doing CBD and it will be so overdone, and we laughed about it. And guess where we are now? Yeah. Saying that,
CBD hummus. What more do we need?
Apparently, CBD bed sheets.
CBD bed sheets. Yeah. Okay.
Well, I think we're reaching
peak CBD.
Peak CBD. Yes. Exactly as expected and predicted. Saying that we should not discount the importance of the molecule and of the cannabinoid. CBD does have great potential, but adding it to hummus, adding it to bed sheets. I think there is a huge danger, which unfortunately was foreseen, that this will devalue the category. The example we have in alcohol, what I mostly use in this, is flavored vodka. Vodka was kind of stagnating, was a category that was going through extreme maturity and saturation across the Western world, and it was trying to find ways to constantly innovate. One of the ways was premiumization. So they started what would become an integral marketing tactic across the FMCG and alcoholic drinks, this whole premiumization mantra of always drinking less but better and more premium. And at some point after they tried that for a while, and following the Great Recession, they decided to do flavor sophistication. And while the initial idea was great, and it started really well because the sales were actually not cannibalizing the original brands, they started adding more and more flavors and more flavors. And they reached a stage that we had lots of English breakfast vodka flavors. And that is the moment, more or less like CBD at the moment, that you know that the end is essentially nigh. And the problem with this is that it doesn't take down the salmon vodkas and the English breakfast vodkas only. It takes down the vodka category in its entirety. And I think that is essentially the major problem or potential future problem for CBD. I think it does have potential. I think imaginative formulations can actually hit the right buttons across the board in FMCGs, but it has to be done with respect, not just for the cannabinoid, but also for the respective industries that it is used within. Otherwise, it will devalue both.
Yeah, it's definitely something I have a concern about as well, because for exactly the same point, the devaluation comes from people not taking it seriously or trying it and not getting anything and thinking this is all just a gimmick, which in some of those products it is.
I'm also worried about the people that think that it's not. I'm also worried about the person that drinks 3 mg of CBD in a bottle of water and they think this has an effect, when we know that research, the only research that's available at the moment, the only clinical research that's available, is only using quantities of 300 to 1,000 per day. So obviously this is placebo at this stage.
Yeah.
The moment that person realizes that, placebo can be great to an extent, but the moment that person that feels the placebo effect wakes up to the fact, again, they will actually become very vocal about not using CBD or any cannabinoids or cannabis for that matter whatsoever.
Yeah.
So I think we are definitely in agreement, and I think people start catching up on that. I would hope the wider population as well, not just us few within the European cannabis community. And I hope that at least on the side of alcohol, it has been, for obvious extra legislative issues, they have been extremely careful in approaching or combining with cannabinoids at the moment. So we haven't seen any of the extreme kind of Me Too kind of behavior that we see in other industries.
So in terms of alcohol, and I've actually seen more and more drinks being of not necessarily alcohol with alcohol in them, but beverages. And a kind of key blocker to that was the kind of natural state of cannabis the cannabinoids not being water soluble, which makes the kind of delivery method hard in a beverage. What's your view on the state of technology in relation to making the cannabinoids water soluble? There's like nano emulsion technologies, etc.
I wouldn't want to go, I think for our listeners as well, I don't think going down very deep into the sciencey jargon would be helping. Also, not for anything else, but because the developments are actually daily or hourly at this stage.
Okay.
Even reading one paper coming out one day, the next morning someone else has found new ways. What I think we have to keep, and I think it forms part of my vision about medium-term future. I think in the next couple of years, first of all, the first step will be the massive commoditization of cannabis and cannabinoids. And that would lead to massive write-downs in the value of lots of cultivation investments that have happened. Because one of the most interesting research developments that I've seen in the last couple of years is not actually the onset and how do you break it down and how do you make it water soluble, but actually how to produce cannabinoids not in farms but in vats. And the moment that happens and essentially cannabinoids become a commodity, not a farm product anymore, the entire ecosystem of what we consider now to be the cannabis industry, as you can imagine, will be entirely disrupted.
Yeah.
And within that disruption, it will not be so important who has the most massive warehouses.
Yeah.
It's just about the size at this stage. We read this kind of very phallic, macho kind of approach about the cannabis industry, which is the wrong way.
How many square foot?
Yeah, exactly. How big is mine and how big is yours? I think this is very wrong, and we have started seeing the results of that already. Imagine if we've seen the first examples of using yeast, for example, to replicate cannabinoids, especially cannabinoids that are much less frequent in the plant than THC or CBD, and we would have to, one way or the other, find artificial or synthetic ways to produce them. I think that is the most interesting direction that the industry will be taking in the next few years, and that will happen probably quite soon, and you will see massive disruption of the major leading companies, massive write-downs of what they have bought, and finally the importance of brands, because the moment the ingredients become a commodity, what is the differentiated factor, what actually adds value, will be brands. So we can finally, at that stage, start discussing about cannabis, which we start doing in Canada, we start doing in some US states, like any other FMCG industry. The importance is within the emotional connection of the brand. No one really spends hours discussing about grapes in wine, except a very few geeks that, love their thing and they will continue doing that. They are talking about brands. That's what really has value, and that's what we will start seeing being built more and more.
Yeah. I mean, just the sheer scale of the numbers of cannabinoids and the terpenes and the flavonoids may combat that, maybe, because maybe you can isolate and you can manufacture cannabinoids in a different way, but the whole plant and all the kind of synergistic effects of that will still have a place, I'm sure.
Of course, and that place will be extremely interesting as well, because I would think that, but it will not be in the massive warehouses, that place. That place will exist, but it will be sun-grown, outdoor, talking about terroir, talking about specific appellations, talking about using the language. Again, you're taking parallels with alcoholic drinks, which is very interesting, in its sense. Anyway, this is already happening.
Yeah, the craft
movement. And the geographic identifications that we see in Champagne, in Cognac, regions that have the gravitas to actually command much higher prices, and they can actually discuss the plant, all the cultivation process, all the cultivars, or the varieties, to an audience that will understand it, and they're very happy to pay a premium for them as well. But when we're talking about the mass market, I mean, you have to remember, I know that very well because I've been looking at the alcohol industry for so long that it's kind of a second nature to me. But the vast majority of beers sold in the world at the moment are still mass-produced. They're not craft. I know that everyone's talking about craft for the last 12 years. I've been talking about craft for so long, but I should always remind myself that the vast majority of beer is not craft. It is mass-produced. The companies that produce them do not necessarily cultivate. They just buy the commodities, produce the brands. So that is the direction that will inevitably happen in cannabis as well. But the real value, where someone can actually push the premiumization narrative, that will happen much faster than in alcohol, because consumers are already trained thinking premium. They already, because of every other industry, they're already primed for it. That's where the premiumization will happen in cannabis, and will happen, as we said, in specific regions. I think in California, they're already discussing creating their own geographic identification that will immediately command much higher prices. And that side, I would obviously find the most interesting in many ways. But at the same time, the commoditized side should also not be discounted.
And look, when you explain it like that, it's really quite obvious, isn't it? The mass market is the mass market in virtually any FMCG category, and so it's highly likely that will occur in this sector as well. So all of that makes sense. So I guess you mentioned Constellation Brands, who, for the benefit of the listeners, they invested $4 billion into Canopy Growth, which is the largest cannabis company in the world, and that was a couple of years ago now.
They even raised their stake last year.
So very, very big move. But then there's been other alcohol companies that have got involved.
Most on course with Hexo, Hydropothecary, I believe they're called nowadays. AB InBev, the biggest beer company in the world, not actually having a joint venture, but creating a kind of partnership specifically focusing on research and development with Tilray. All of these are the big icons out there. It's like
I haven't heard much about Diageo. There's always rumours about them, but
there is. Maybe
we'll talk about it off.
I think we can definitely say without remorse that in my experience the last few years, I don't think there is any alcohol producer that, if not actively looking and investing in the industry, at the very least, they are following the developments extremely close.
Yes.
And that I think we can be happy to share with the audience without any...
Yeah. And so I guess they must be initially scared, but have probably evolved that sort of viewpoint into how can we capitalize on it.
The basis of the argument is exactly where I started with our conversation. They don't have a choice. That is the key. When I first wrote my first craft article 8 years ago, 9, I wasn't one of the bearded geeks in the States writing about craft 15 years ago. I'm not going to lie. But I was one of the first, business analysts discussing craft. I remember, and again I quote, nobody will remember the term craft in 2 years' time. That was 12 years ago. And they lost that. They missed that boat. And they had to, especially the beer side of things, because spirits were a bit later and they managed to make the right moves, or to at least create the right narratives in their brands, to at least create the craftsmanship narrative, if not necessarily anything else, to maintain this relevance to this demographic and to this trend. But beer completely missed that. And essentially in the process, they missed about 20-30% of their sales, which is not little. And I think that was a cautionary tale that, if nothing else, enforce the points and make them think twice before missing any trends ever again.
Yeah, so they may be naturally cautious, but they're definitely looking into it.
What would you do if your core demographic stopped drinking your product?
Yeah.
You have to find alternatives.
Yeah, you have to evolve. Right.
Yes.
Cool. So, I mean, look, you, as I said, you mentioned that previous talk that I'd seen you about. In a couple of years' time, no one's going to be talking about CBD. What are your predictions, I guess, for the next year or the next 5 years? Anything longer than that would be real crystal ball stuff. But even if you can stretch to 5 years, I guess, a lot of it's probably going to be heavily reliant on legislative changes, which is obviously impossible to predict. But where do you see things going in the next couple of years at least?
I see, first of all, we have the rise of cannabis 2.0, as we call it in Canada. Essentially, edibles and beverages coming online by the end of this year in Canada, which I think will be a massive game changer. We'll actually start seeing many of the products that these companies have been working behind in their labs, resolving the onset issues, resolving the flavor issues, because many of the products actually available at the moment apparently do not taste very good. I'm being extremely forgiving right now.
Yeah.
It's not just making it work. I mean, you have to give someone a reason why they wouldn't just vape or smoke or eat something and instead drink. Yeah. The price point has to be the correct one. The occasions have to be the correct one. So I think we will see these products coming online and they will change many things, inspire different situations, create different occasions. I think we're going to see a transition away from this technical fetishization with cultivars and strains that actually do not reflect the reality. Most of the products available at the moment for sale are not the strains that they're supposed to be. The false dichotomy between sativas and indicas will be mostly a thing of the past. Yeah. And we will increasingly move into a direction of mood states. So products that will be talking the language of the consumer instead of trying to superimpose a language that the consumer does not understand. Wine made that mistake. Wine tried to use 5,000 grapes to discuss a simple ritual that people wanted an emotional connection with. This has been a major problem for the wine industry, and I'm happy to see that the cannabis industry learned from there, and they decided that instead of talking about stuff that the vast majority of consumers out there, especially new kind of curious consumers, are not familiar with, why don't we use need states, occasions, and mood states? For example, a product that would be ideal for insomnia, making you sleepy, or a product that would be ideal for occasions like watching a movie at home, or a product that, so it will be tailored for specific, again, no, you have to remember, no alcohol product can do that. I mean, I work from the alcohol industry. I know that many will come and say, but some products are more high energy and some are less. But in essence, they're all ethanol in different quantities. Like, imagine the infinite combinations that you mentioned earlier of terpenes, flavonoids, and cannabinoids in the infinity and the exact hyper customization opportunities that these can create. It is a battle that I cannot see the simplified alcoholic offerings that look so oversimplified compared to this can actually fight in the long term.
But I mean, that's a challenge for most of these industries in the sort of the wellness space as well, and pharma. The infinite possibilities make it very difficult to scale in a certain way, because if you're looking at a personalized experience, it's what's going to work for you is going to be different for me, right? But this is what the alcohol industry, what the big alcohol industry does is it finds a beer and it brands the hell out of it, and then it makes 10 billion bottles of it.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
And cannabis offers huge amounts more scope to personalize it, but then as a business, it's difficult to attack that.
The scale is one of the questions that they're trying to resolve at the moment, but I think this is the moment where my point about VATs come into play. Because at the moment, in a quite short-sighted way, I think the industry is thinking of resolving this by just building bigger and bigger warehouses. I think this is an old school solution to a new problem, and I think they need to think outside the box. And there is a number of smaller companies that are experimenting in their labs. This is not going to happen in the next month. But as I said, this is the only solution that will allow for the levels of hyper customization that we're talking about now, especially when we're talking about cannabinoids that exist in minuscule quantities in the plant.
Yeah.
Because you would need like cultivated lands of, stretching for entire nations to be able to have the right quantity.
Yeah.
So the only way to resolve that problem would be to synthetically create them.
Yeah.
And I think that will inevitably at some point happen.
And I'm just starting, my mind's sort of ticking over now. I guess a part of the...
in 3 years' time, we will be here having a chat. Remember talking about VATs?
Yeah, exactly. I guess part of the innovation will be in the production processes as well, right?
Yes.
Being able to mix the right proportions of different things and in a quick kind of fashion.
That, but also communicate to consumers, educate consumers about the importance of that, and at the same time educate the consumers about the importance of the actual plant and the cultivated outdoors or indoors in specific. All of that has to happen, and we're still in the very, very first stages. I mean, as we were saying earlier, most people don't even know exactly what CBD is at this stage. So sometimes, when I talk about these things in Europe, people look at me like, what are you talking about? This is not... But it's an industry that is moving so fast that we need to be able to take the risk to express an opinion. I think this is what I'm personally missing from a lot of the analysis, especially coming from Europe, but even from the US. There's a lot of factual stuff out there. There's a lot of people counting beans. There's a lot of fear to extrapolate from that and use the vision to see a future and how that will evolve. Because just having the numbers of sales for the last 3 quarters somewhere doesn't say anything. It's not enough. It's not a big enough timeline to actually make any assumptions even.
Barely started.
It's nothing. Yeah. Yes. But people are basing their entire empires on these 3 data points or something without the capacity to, that works now. That doesn't mean it's going to work in 5 years' time. Where do we see the industry evolving? These kind of ideas that we exchange right now, I'm missing that a lot, unfortunately, from Europe at the moment. It is people are either fearful to express them or they hold them back, perhaps, or... They
just don't know.
They just don't know. Maybe they just don't know.
I mean, yeah, look, that makes it really exciting. That's for me, one of the reasons why I genuinely love what I'm doing now, because so much of it is unwritten. I think I've said that about 10 times on this show, but it genuinely...
So it's my favorite Joe Strummer quote, by the way.
What's that, sorry?
It's my favorite Joe Strummer quote. The Joe Strummer from The Clash. I believe he said that the future is unwritten. So there you are.
No, well, I didn't even know that.
Yeah, you go.
Joe Strummer, no way. Okay, cool. Right, so, well, look, that's been brilliant. I'm going to finish now with my traditional last question, which is, what did your parents say when you told them that you were getting into the cannabis industry?
I don't think I've told my dad. I have told my mom repeatedly, mostly sending her photos from the fancy hotels around the world where I go and speak about cannabis, because I find that to be much more hilarious.
Yes.
Exactly, because of the juxtaposition of what you would expect and what is the case. But actually, I always used my mom as my indicator. So my mom is the very average kind of traditional semi-conservative person with no relation with this industry, never been around it. So when she started telling me that the last time she visited her physiotherapist, there was this old lady there that was swearing to the power of this new substance, that CB something, I realized that taboos are broken, and that's in Greece. I realized that the mom indicator is flashing red or green. So yeah, that's the story from my side.
And if your dad listens to this podcast, he will know now that
I will, yes.
Your secret is out.
My secret is out.
Cool. Thank you, Spiros. It's been a really entertaining chat, and actually, even in 6 months, you could come on again and chat more.
Absolutely.
Cool. Brilliant. Thank you.
A pleasure.
Great show. Thank you for joining me for that. I hope you enjoyed that. It was a really interesting chat full of real insight, actually. And let's see how many of Spiros' predictions come off. It's obviously less of a thing here in Europe at the moment, but good to keep an eye on what's going on in North America in relation to drinks companies. So as I mentioned, I have 2 VIP tickets to give away for the Medical Cannabis Summit in Malta, which is happening November 4th to 6th. The conference will feature a host of speakers covering all angles of medical cannabis, from regulatory to investment, and will highlight the Maltese government's commitment commitment to legislation supporting this high growth sector. The main event is obviously me speaking, but in addition to entry to the conference, you'll get access to the VIP lounge, some dinners and exclusive outside events thrown in too. If you're interested in that giveaway, please check out and follow the Cannabis Conversation LinkedIn page for more details coming up in the next few days. Thanks again for joining me this week, and I will see you next week. Take care.